We're going to start with the Alexandria Dialogues Briefing Round 1. It is moderated by Professor Hind Hanafi. She's the former president of Alexandria University and a professor of faculty at Faculty of Medicine, Alexandria University. And our panelists will be His Excellency Professor Maged Osman, former Minister of Communication and Information Technology, and CEO and Managing Director, Basira Egyptian Center for Public Opinion Research in Egypt. And we have Professor Malak Zalou, Professor of Practice and Director, Graduate School of Education at the American University in Cairo. And finally, we have Professor Khalid Abu Zaid, Senior Regional Water Resources Program Manager at the Center for Environment and Development of the Arab region and Europe. And now I leave the floor to Professor Hanafi to moderate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Marwa. I would first like to thank Biblioteca Alexandrina, Dr. Mustapha Al-Fiqi and Dr. Marwa and their team, and the United Nations, Dr. Richard Dixon, and all his team who were very cooperative and very active during the sessions. I had the opportunity to be one of the members in the second dialogue, which was related to education and how will we see an educated person in 2050. And I would just like to say the persons who participated, or some of the persons who participated in this group, because we had the honor to be with His Excellency Dr. Samir Radwan, His Excellency Dr. Yusri Gamal, and His Excellency Dr. Ahmed Gohari, and His Excellency Ambassador Hani Slim, and of course Professor Malak Zalouk, who is an expert in education, not only a professor, and a group of experts from different fields, and professors from the Faculty of Medicine and Faculty of Commerce. We had Dr. Reda and Dr. Hiba with us, Dr. Hiba Asim. So it was a real brainstorming situation, showing that people who were in the administration of the country, how will they think for the future? How would they think what happened during their being in action, and then later on you would think of things that you would like to do or you would like to think of in the future. So it's like a return to the future, and still we had younger people with us. I also attended the debriefing in the Ministry of Planning and Economic Reform, and we had different dialogues, and many of the people were present there. And I'd like also to welcome all the experts, all the ministers who are present here with us today, Dr. Hassam Sharaf, and many of the prestigious people who are experts in different fields and who want Egypt to move forward. I think everyone in this hall wants Egypt to move forward. That's why we're here together. Today, or I'd like also to say that Egypt's sustainable development goals and the vision of Egypt 2030 is there and has been there, and it's implemented. And it's not only documents on paper. Implementation is starting and it's working, and we are in the process to reach our goals in 2030. So we should always think positively. Of course, to reach 2050, we need more effort, we need more innovation, and at the same time, we have the 2063 African goals of sustainable development. So it's always going further and further. I would like to first start by Professor Dr. Maged Osman, former Minister of IT, and it's an honor that he's with us, and at the same time, he's going to speak about how will an inclusive society look like in Egypt in 2050. And it's an opportunity that we will not leave anyone behind. And Dr. Maged Osman is a member in the National Council of Women, so he will not leave women behind. And he was the Minister of IT, which will drive the community forward, definitely. So you've got many aspects and many facets. So please take the floor.
Thank you, Dr. Hind. I was told that I can speak in Arabic or in English, then I'm going to speak in Arabic. If you need any mics for the translation, please do.
منكم من يحتاج الترجمة إلى الإنجليزية فليتفضل باستخدام الهيدسيتس. كيف يمكن لمجتمع متكامل أن ما يبدو عليه العام من شكل المجتمع من ناحية
خليني استخدم اللغة العربية
ما هو بينقل
الاكسكلوجن هو الاقصاء.
مسألة اللي نتحدث هنا عن المجتمع الاندماجي. And this is what I'm going to use in my presentation today. Now, if we want to talk about inclusion, الاندماج, we might probably talk about also exclusion that might be of cultural nature, economic or political. And if we look at the different sectors in Egypt, I think there are criteria upon which we can probably exclude in some of those areas. So this could be based on gender. Maybe females may be excluded. So when we look at education, for example, there is absolutely no gap between men and women in different levels of education. But when we talk about employment, there probably you might hear sort of a lot of people sort of arguing for excluding women. What about like 22%, which is very little? That is the representation of women, but which is a common denominator in the Arab region. Now, so the first type of exclusion is gender-based. There is also some kind of exclusion that is wealth-based. Which in fact the poor, we see that the poor are basically excluded on different levels. And I'm sure the Egyptian society and some other societies are probably seeing some kind of exclusion that is based on social class, not based on capabilities and abilities and skills. And I'm sure, as you know, the Egyptian situation, and if you look at the temples and you look at the pyramids, when people talk about the social strata in Egypt, the very top layer or class is usually very narrow, so which includes only very few people, but then the middle one is probably larger, which includes the people working for the army and so on. But then you have the priests, and then you have the ruler or the king or the pharaoh. So it is, you see, if you look at the temple and this kind of structure, it's not just a structural building, but it is also a concept. Now, apart from, if you look at probably this kind of exclusion based on gender or wealth or income, there could be also some type, could be according to age. Maybe so talking about differences in age, young people versus elderly people. Usually also there is people are more sort of prejudiced probably to the elderly. Some people may be able to use the technology and social media, whereas other groups may not be that efficient. So the third point is exclusion, which is according to residence, place of residence. So I'm talking about rural versus urban areas. So for example, differences between, also within the rural itself, there could be some subdivisions. So it's also geographical, according to where you are living. And I'm sure you also know that there are some geographic reasons that lead to this. Now, the type of exclusion could also be, so I'll probably limit myself to 5 main factors. And here there is another exclusion that is based on body status, which is people handicapped, people with special needs might be also excluded. Moving, for example, people within, for example, Cairo, for example, for those with special needs, that might be difficult, or might be difficult also to get a job. And they probably cannot do that. Then the idea of exclusion itself is there in good education and employment, or better jobs. And this kind of exclusion, in fact, leads to some kind of blocked mobility. And many people, for example, who are subjected or exposed to this, they probably find it difficult to move from place to place, even if they might have some skills or knowledge to do so. For example, in Egypt, we have like a free university education. But if you look at the students of the university, I'm speaking of governmental and not private universities. If we divide them, you can divide them into 5 categories based on income, for example, like 20%, less than 20, and so on, until you get to the richest. So, for example, the presence of a student that is affiliated to the category of less than 20%, which might be 1 to 7. That is, for example, for each and every one in the poor areas, there are 7 that are below 20. But also, if you look at the disciplines and the specialities, we're also from health, engineering point of view, they probably are more able to make more money. But then the ratio is 1 to 173. So people from poorer families can probably go to the university, but they usually cannot attain these jobs simply because they cannot afford. So they probably go to the lesser sort of specialties. So here we're talking about like a vicious sort of circle that we need to correct. And I don't want to cry over spilled milk here, but we need to think carefully how we can improve that. Let me, in the time remaining, I will probably use some analytical approach. And there are some indices that we can go to. One is worldwide education. This index is attributed to 50 countries. Egypt is one of them. So, of course, the ranking of Egypt in that kind of category doesn't really mean much. And I think, but the ranking of Egypt comes in sort of 46th place. But there are also other countries that were not included, so probably the meaning of that index, that's why I'm saying it doesn't really mean so much. So the highest was Finland, and the index was 81%, and the least was Pakistan, and the index was 20. Egypt is 28, has an index of 28. So there is probably an 8% difference between Egypt and Pakistan, but more, of course, of a gap between Egypt and Finland. So where are we in that kind of matrix? This kind of index is probably composed of 3 things. It's about policy environment, teaching environment, and social economic environment. And these 3 things are not completely different. We needed to be able to do things across all of these categories. When we talk about education, when Dr. Malak Zalouk is here, and I'm sure she's more specialized, and she can tell you, talk to you much better than I can. Then here I'm talking about human resources here. And it's one of the advice that were given by also the International Bank. But it puts us in front of a framework that tells us, for example, what are the capabilities that might enable a child to become more productive in the future. And here we have about 5 indices that are related to health, nutrition, and survival. And all of these indices together, combined, based on different models worked out in the World Bank, they forecast or predict some input about productivity, and this is going to reflect very much on the economic situation, on whether in a macro or a micro level. And here I am talking about some materialistic elements, but then the inclusion of a human being to be able to feel the value of life and the value of their presence, of course, is another thing. Now, all of these 5 indices that they use for that prediction in terms of productivity, 4 of them we don't have problems with. But I think the real problem comes with education. Let me give you an example. They work out the years of education, and they work out some kind of harmonization on a quality-based index. So the quality of education is probably 50%, then this will be multiplied by the years of education. And then you get a number. Sometimes it's 3, sometimes it's 10. This is like an approximate way, but it is meaningful. So the index of quality education is very much based on some testing measures. Of course, the least of these countries probably has 300, and the highest is 600. Egypt is 300. Fraction. Okay. So 340, 50. Also, when you look at the productivity of the worker, is also probably like 49%. Why am I saying this? I'm saying this because I want to say that education is a significant factor in this process. If people get good education, we're talking about a society that will have more inclusion rather than exclusion, regardless of cultural factors. So here we're talking about inclusion, mobility. The key element here is education plus some other cultural factors. And so what can we do in order to enhance inclusion in society? We need to be thinking of future changes. I'm talking about generally, but the changes, the future changes are not sort of linear. That is, it might be sort of exponential factors as well. So what happened in the past will not necessarily happen in the future. That's what I want to say. The second point is what we call the black swan, because there are sometimes things that we never expected, and they can change the future significantly. And here I'm not talking about revolutions also, but I mean there are changes in ideas, in concepts, in technology, and with this opening that we see in Egypt, this might accelerate inclusion in Egypt. Now, I think one of the most difficult challenges is the values and the role that values can play. And if we talk about the set of values that are prevalent here, here in Egypt, and if we look about the policies and the values prevailing, there is a gap. So here I'm talking about empowering women in a society where the values are probably going off track, as it were. Usually people prefer to give the job to a male rather than a female. Society talks about the role that the government can play in industry, in service providing, the marginalization of the public sector, and how can you get taxes from all of these. So there are values that are really left aside completely. In order for us to make the future better, then we need to look at all of these things. And I think I'll probably have to stop here, because I hope I have maybe included some points to consider for the future. I would like to thank Richard Dixon. I would like to thank you very much. Now he's listening to the interpretation. And I would also like to thank the Library of Alexandria and the distinguished organization. And I hope all the 1.5 years that we spent on over these dialogues, I hope they will be fruitful in the near future. I personally was involved in the beginning of my career for the project 2020, and then now it's 2030 and 2050, and then Richard now is talking about 2100. So I think we'll probably need to document all of these things so that future generations, when they come and sit here, they can see something that they can refer to. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Magid. And I think we'll probably have to leave. I don't know if we can leave questions to the very end. We have 10 minutes. Would you like to raise some questions now? Because sometimes people may come up with questions, but then they don't get the opportunity. So let's do that now for 10 minutes. He's a well-reputed man. He tried probably to avoid talking about some religious elements or matters. I think I will probably may represent you or excuse you from not tackling that point, but I will have to do it myself. There are things, for example, what has to do with overpopulation. And in all possible scenarios, if this overpopulation gets in that kind of rate, then the shorter and the lesser the amount of natural resources that a man may get. I think the kind of renaissance and advancement that we saw in China recently, I think there was a plan with certain procedures. People do not trust plans because it's changeable, always changeable, and it doesn't do anything. As you know, in China, they said like 2020, they will, when they got their target objectives by 1820, they probably allowed a second birth for the family. And I'm sure now this has some kind of impact for people in competitiveness, in China's competitors. But I think the problem we have is quite important. I would like to tell you that the distribution of the demography in Egypt is something to consider. If you are embarrassed, if you don't want to talk about that, because you avoided talking about it, I will have to say that this should be included in your report. Thank you very much. Dr. Magid, would you like, let's take some other questions, then we can respond them to immediately, all of them.
يا ريت عشان الجمهور كله يبقى عارف اللي
could you please introduce yourself? Mustafa Galal Said, a professor in political science. My colleague here said he wanted to avoid the embarrassment, but I would also, yes, I would agree that if you talk about the religious element, there are Muslims, there are Christians, there are Shia, there are all sort of other sects. Now, do you want to talk about that? Can you please expand on the idea? Because we want to know what kind of exclusion are we talking about, and the idea of identity. The second point is, I don't know what you mean by, because when you talked about, they talked about the present. And this present, we're in here, but we're talking about 2050. Now, do you think, are you suggesting that this will go on, will continue until 2050? Or what? And what criteria are you using for this? Dr. Maha, then. Thank you. Dr. Maha Mustafa, assistant professor in economics at the American University and the Canadian University. I would like to second your opinion here, and thank you very much for the topic suggested, because it is quite significant. That has an impact on women. The 84% of the responses when people said that women should go to work, or people who said that they prefer women for the job, I think there is a lot of disappointment that we see in the street, like harassment in public transportation and in the street. Are we by 2050? Do you think it's going to be some kind of deterrent that can stop this, so that Egypt can become capable of? We need to see that some kind of political will here. If we can control this, and if we can put a soldier or a detective on each and every corner in the streets. You say that in your statistics, sometimes women, in fact, are pro-men also. Some of them, for example, prefer that men take the job rather than they take it. And now, is there a solution by 2050 for that? Yes, please. There are two participants here.
Hello. I'm Accord William, a student of Faculty of Science from South Sudan. I have two questions I need to ask. One is about
Faculty of Science here in Alexandria?
Yeah, Alexandria University. I have two questions I need to ask. One is about education. According to Egyptian policy of public universities, the language of communication in the university is Arabic. So like Egypt 2050, how would you consider a student who don't speak Arabic in the university? For example, the lectures you give is in Arabic, and a lot of students come from different countries who don't understand Arabic. And my second question is about Egypt's location in the continent. Egypt is located in the continent of Africa, but Egyptians nationals treat other African nationals as foreigners in Egypt. So how would you tackle such issues in 2050?
Could you please clarify? You were not. We could not hear you. Say it again.
The first question or the second?
Second question.
The second question is about Egyptian nationals not treating other African nationals as of their own. You know, they treating people like. For example, I'll take the issue of South Sudanese primary school student who was arrested in Cairo. He was bullied because he was black. So how would you consider such problems in 2050?
His Excellency Dr. Hassan Nadir, former president of Alexandria University.
Thank
This
you.
is the last question.
I don't need to introduce myself, you did that already. The question is that, how can you make any prediction when we are not sure about the authenticity of the data that you are presented? I don't think that in Egypt we are sure of any percentage or any number published by anyone. So how can you predict any advancement or trends or whatever if you are not sure of the data itself?
قبل ما دكتور ماجد يجاوب على السؤال ده I would like بس just to say إن بصيرة سنتر أو بصيرة دكتور ماجد السي او بتعمل statistics يعني إن إحنا نعرف where we are. It's very good so that we can advance, and this might be an answer to the question which was said we are speaking about now and we're not speaking about the future. But we have to know what's happening now. But at the same time, this is a selected number of people. It's not مش كده يعني يمكن Dr. Magid will explain more how Basira works to get these statistics. تفضل حضرتك.
First of all, I apologize because you couldn't follow my talk, and I thought there is a translation, and I thought you will use the mics. I apologize for that. I didn't realize that you didn't have the mics. Let me answer the question in English so that best to compensate for that. I think the issue of the الخطاب الديني أو the religious discourse is crucial for the future, because if you don't do actually the transition to يعني culture reform, nothing will happen, because culture reform is really essential for everything. I'm not sure whether we are on the right track in terms of renewing the religious reform, because actually the reform is done by the same people who did all the problems. I don't expect that people who wrote the religious discourse will reform it. It's obvious that we need to think differently. And I remember since I was young that I heard تجديد الخطاب الديني or reforming the religious culture again and again, but nothing is happening. I think we need to be serious about it. What's happening is not really the best thing. When I mentioned the type of exclusion, I only mentioned 5, but of course there is more than that. But I thought these are the most as examples. But of course you can think of other type of exclusion. Actually, the issue of data limitation is very important, and I think if you would like to really to create or to build a modern society cannot be built without accurate data and without updated data. And what we have seen lately is a sort of people are not people. People who are in the government do not like to see more data. I think they prefer to have less data, and I think they have to live with that. But definitely the decisions are not going to be wise if you don't have the proper data. And we can see a number of examples. I'm not talking about any politics or so, but I'm talking about issues that are related to social environment and social variables that we used to have data for it, and we don't have data now. The problem that the changes that is happening in society is very, very fast, and unless we are keeping our fingers on what is happening in the society, we'll be amazed by the changes that was happening, but without being noticed because we didn't collect the right data. I fully agree with Dr. Hassan that any analysis of the current situation or for the future, we need more data and we need relevant data. But the good side of the story, I think, is that what we are going to see in the near future is the end of the monopoly of government on data. Because with the big data are now in the hands of public sector, in the hands of civil society, and you can see a lot of information and data that is going to be produced outside the government. and the nostalgia of only having data from the government is going to end. Just to give you an example, in Egypt we have data that is produced every 3 months on the parameters or the KPIs of the labor market. This is a source of data that is there is a flow in this data. Of course, you can disagree with the estimate, etc. But if you look now, you have young entrepreneurs who created a mobile application for matching the supply and demand in labor force, and they have a huge data on the demand on the demand is on each jobs and on each sectors, etc. And this is the data that is valuable, that is lifetime, that is updated every day, and even the government cannot collect it. There is a lot of opportunities for data that will happen from different sources. Of course, we still have the problem of how to synchronize this data with other formal statistics, etc. But this is a different story. But I think we can also have something different in terms of data production. I think these are the question that was addressed to me, except for Dr. Meha. She mentioned harassment. I'm not sure what will happen in harassment in 2050, but if you continue as we are with the same value system, with the same crowdness in our roads, in the same mentality, etc., probably it will stay the same, unless you have really a major change in way of thinking and in value system. Nothing will change. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe in answering this question, we have to go to education. Education is the backbone for everything. معلش في comment? There was a question?
Sorry. I remember. I forget.
Okay, there was a question.
I'm sorry.
I missed it too.
You posed the question of how come Egyptian universities, they are teaching in Arabic, and then probably students do not know a lot of English, and this is a must for the future. I fully agree with you, but this is, I think it has to do with education, and unless there is a good education system that provides education including a good grasp of the English language, you cannot really ask students to get their education in English, because otherwise they don't have the capability to do that. But I think you need to start from the early stage and teach people language, either English or French or whatever, second language that they can master it, so that they can use this language in learning. But probably Dr. Malak, she's the expert in education, and you will find all the answer with her. Regarding your feeling of racism in Egypt, I'm very sorry to hear that, and I have to say that not all Egyptians are racist. I mean, this is happening everywhere. I hope it's only special cases, but definitely Africa for us as Egyptian is really our roots, is our heart, is our, and we cannot really undermine the Africans because colors or whatever. We have so many Egyptians who have dark skin, and and this is, maybe there is a few cases that happen that are, but this is not really the majority of people. And definitely, on behalf of all people, I apologize for any act that is improper in this context. Thank you.
And it might be due to language constraints, not to real racism. So please don't feel outsiders. We are all together in Africa, and we all love you, and we want to take care of you, and you take care of us. Egypt is definitely facing many challenges: poverty, gender inequality, problems in health, social protection, water scarcity. So we have climate change. We're facing many, many problems. And to face all these problems, I think the backbone is education. And I've read all the dialogues, and within the dialogues and the summaries which you have put down, I found that in each dialogue, the education comes first and is mentioned in each of the 6 dialogues. And it is the backbone. And it's not only the backbone because we all know that education is important, it's because behavior from the early childhood to prevent harassment starts from education in schools. Everything is related to education. If a person is not well educated, we will not be able to solve all our problems. So, and we will not be able to compete in the global market. So, I'm sorry, Dr. Malak, you have to face a big problem and to tell us how to help in reaching quality education, because it's not a matter of numbers. It's a matter of quality of education, a qualified, educated person with all the meaning of the word educated. So, Dr.
Thank
Malak,
you for giving me such a huge challenge.
And I'd like to say that Dr. Malak is a professor of practice and director of the Graduate School of Education in the American University in Cairo.
Of the Middle East Institute in the graduate school.
Institute in the graduate school, it's not written that way. Okay.
Okay, so good afternoon, and I'm truly humbled by all the expertise and ex-ministers and everyone else in this room. What I'll do is perhaps, first of all, thank the Biblioteca and UNDP for this very important initiative. And what I'll start by doing is to quickly summarize some of the highlights of what we did in our dialogue, and possibly the summary, what relates to the dialogue, and then move on to what next. So to begin with, we were in the dialogue on citizenship of the future. What would it mean to be an educated person in 2050? And I think it was an extremely interesting exercise. It was multidisciplinary, a lot of expertise was in the room, and we came up with different scenarios, some of which, as the report mentions, were inside out in their approach. In other words, sticking to education in the traditional sense of classrooms and schools. And another approach was rather outside in, looking more at the drivers of change and how might that impact on education. So looking more at the citizenship participation and how might that go into impacting education. We came up with 3 scenarios, one which was totally anti-progress and was rather looking at the past and pastoral ideas, and was a rather bleak scenario. And another one was irrational society, again resisting change, except for technology, which took the lead. And a third one, which was really the hopeful one and the very optimistic one, which was a knowledge-based society and had citizens that were very engaged and were ready for change. And that obviously technology was going to be used for progress. We actually went into even profiling what a learned, educated person might look in the future, and we focused on a woman of the future and what might she look like as an educated person. There were a lot of important themes in the larger report which linked to the progressive scenario of education that was summarized earlier by Mr. Richard Dictus. And some of those themes I pull out because the solution will address those themes. So one, obviously, as was mentioned by Professor Hanafi and everyone else, was the centrality of education and human-centered quality education, and that was largely led by a lot of youth. Young people really wanted human-centered education, and we should listen to them. And the second one was the need for global citizenship with local identities. So a global citizenship initiative, but with local identities. A third one was the need, and that's a very important one, for decentralization to enable local solutions. and also as an equalizer. And fourthly was the need to promote social cohesion, because obviously it was at risk due to marginalization that Professor Osman spoke about just a while ago, the rural and urban divide, the socioeconomic divisions, class divisions, and generational divides as well. And the fifth general theme was the quality of life and well-being. And generally, there was a lot of optimism, which is very welcome in the report, and the idea of leapfrogging into a better future with technology as a possible disruptor, and possibly bringing in innovation and cohesion. My own take from my own experience and having heard all the deliberations is to propose a new approach for education and to really move into a paradigm shift from education to learning. And just to remind everyone that the fourth goal, Sustainable Development Goal, talks about lifelong learning, no longer this old, limited paradigm of education. And this paradigm shift has in fact tried to be making its way since the late 60s, when all students starting from Nanterre in France and many parts of the world were up in arms and suggesting that education has failed us. And student movements were happening all over the world. And people were fed up with the traditional education, and you had philosophers like Edgar Faure and Jacques Delors who were beginning to think of new paradigm shifts. They were thinking of lifelong learning. They were thinking of different ways of learning, and I suggest learning is the key rather than a restrained educational format. A model that seems to have worked all over the world, and I think, in my personal view, can really, and has shown that it can reconciliate a lot of the paradoxes of the 2050s to come, and those that I mentioned from the report, are the creation of learning cities. And I'm avoiding smart cities because of the cyber war. So I'm looking at learning cities. Well, what are learning cities? These are cities that effectively mobilize all their resources in every single sector of the community to promote inclusive learning from basic to higher education. It integrates all learning opportunities together because it uses all new and existing spaces in a given city or community for the purposes of learning. It embraces learning in formal and non-formal settings, and even informal settings. So we're talking of a bridging and link between all the various forms of learning, and it's not just schooling, it's every single form of learning. And it is also lifelong, and even more importantly, it's life-wide. So it revitalizes learning in the families, in the communities, in the workplace, and also with the use of technology. These are real movements that are happening globally. I come from an institute of lifelong learning that is in Hamburg. I've just been the former chairperson in that institute, where there has been a UNESCO global movement of learning cities worldwide. The majority of these learning cities currently are in Asia. They're China, Korea, but they started in Europe, of course, and a lot of them are in Europe. And so far, there has been quite a bit of research, particularly in Asia, that is beginning to show evidence that the creation of these learning cities, those local solutions to larger problems, when you have a huge problem, break it into smaller issues, decentralize, go into your local community. That's the way to go. And the research has shown us that so far these learning cities are producing individual empowerment and social cohesion, very important, human development and well-being, flourishing and cultural prosperity. There's a lot more solidarity that happens on the community basis, sustainable development, really important as well. And what it creates is a situation of not just human connectivity, but human bonding, even more important. And I think that's the key. It's the community, it's the human bonding, it's the inclusion, it's the democracy, to have citizens who are able to participate in all walks of life and to participate in lifelong learning for all citizens. It breaks away from traditional educational systems and offers new opportunities for revitalized human communities to include the aged, the disadvantaged, the marginalized, and there have been, I'm talking of the possible and the preferred in Mr. Dixter's terms. So it's the possible and the preferred. Because there is already evidence that this is possible. It's flourishing in many parts of the world, and it's the preferred route. And it's a formula where citizens are empowered, but most importantly also, teachers are empowered. And that is the key to quality learning. And teachers need not be your formal school teachers. Teachers are the parents who need learning, are the teachers in your schools, but they're also your educators at the university level, and they're also your educators in the non-formal settings as well. So this is the kind of initiative that has an empowering effect because people are solving their own issues. People are engaged in solving their own problems at a localized level. It also has shown and proven to lead to healthy lifestyles and also to empowering people economically with dignity. And as I said, there is currently a global network of learning cities. There are now 200 plus. You may or may not know that we have 2 learning cities upcoming in Egypt, one in Giza and one in Aswan. We at the American University in Cairo would like to promote this movement, and possibly with the League of Arab States, with other regional bodies, to promote this movement to enlarge the possibility of decentralized learning at the local level with community input and by creating more and more learning cities. So join us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Malak. It's very informative and very innovative. Yes, the questions, please. Now we'll start. في مايك ممكن المايك؟
I'm going to speak in Arabic. My name is Salah Kabish from the Ministry of Transport. Education includes pre-university and university educations. And you have never talked about scientific research, which is a major component of education. Either research, master's degree and doctor's degree researchers. It's the elite people who present such master's and doctor's degree. Academia supervising such master's and doctor's degree should be linked to institutions and ministries, so that all the challenges and problems faced by ministries should be resolved in such find a solution by researchers. We should optimize scientific researches, whether they be university, public owned or privately owned university. They have every scientific researcher should take into account all sustainable development needs and work on them.
Education and research.
Talking about education, we mean education and scientific research as well. Not only education. Dr. Heba.
Thank you very much for both speeches. Very valuable, very provocative for thinking of the roots of the problem. I totally, we actually all agree that the solution lies in education. But actually we want to touch on values, which has always been there in education in our era. I mean, the education in the 70s has always concentrated on values apart from religion, and when we mix them together, we had the problem that we are currently encountered. So values are really, really very important. This would make society inclusive. I still meet my friends from KG, and we are a mixture of boys and girls. There has never been harassment in our school. So I think we want to go backwards and see what went wrong in the past 20 years in education, and I totally stress on values with education. And I still want to see an optimistic vision, because we have changed, and I don't see much of exclusion, either related to sex, as has been mentioned, or related to religion or to any other problems related to the diversity of the Egyptian population. I'm talking about my own experience, which is very little, but still I'm already past 50, so it might not be very little. Also, I would like to mention that education, when we're talking about education, we're really stressing on primary education. This is where our problem is at the moment. Any other thing is doable and easy, and we have the potential. And one little comment for my friend from South Sudan. I would like to assure him that Egyptians have been always hospitable, very loving and warm with all nationalities. And I'm really very sorry that he had this feeling here. And I mean, if it's really evident, then please talk about it openly, because we have never felt this towards our, we have kinship with all Africans and with every people everywhere. So this would be really heartbreaking to me personally if anyone has felt so. So I would like to meet you personally and talk about this with you. Thank you very much for giving me the opportunity. Thank you very much.
And thank you for this kindness. Dr. Rafiq, حاضر. حاضر. لا، أول بصيت هنا وهنا ما كانش في حد، وبعد كده طيب. اتفضل سعادة السفير.
This was a kind of discrimination, by the way, for the left.
Okay.
Well, very, very briefly, thank you very much, Dr. Malik, for your presentation. Actually, you mentioned some examples from the illuminating models of East Asia in the field of education. And in my capacity as acclaimed specialist in Asian affairs, I can say that there is one important element that we need to focus on concerning this model of Asia, in order to build a better scenario, a best scenario for the 2050. Those examples, illuminating examples, focused on mainly vocational training and vocational education and capacity building of both white and blue-collar labor force. Not in the universities, not in the schools, but inside the factory and inside the unit, the economic unit itself, through the R&D centers and training centers. And this is one major secret behind the progress they achieved. I think we need to focus on that in order to elaborate further a best scenario for the 2050. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dr. Rafiq Khalil, and then Dr. Sharif Delawar, I'd like to hear you. You couldn't be here and we don't hear your expertise.
Thank you. I'd like to stress upon the importance of teaching how to accept knowledge, teaching the scientific thinking and the critical thinking. And this is very important. The skills of critical thinking. This is number one. Number two, to teach the as Heba said, the values and the religions, the other religions. When we teach religion in the primary school, I'd like to teach all the religions. In Egypt, for example, all the Muslims don't know anything about the Christian values, about the Christian festivities, and so on. And therefore, I'd like to stress upon teaching all the religions and the values, and to deduce the values from these religions. And number 3, to teach them how to accept the other. And to understand the other, and accept him, and the values of tolerance.
منهم على قبول الآخر.
دكتور شريف دلاور.
دكتور شريف دلاور. دكتور هند. What about in general terms? In general terms, according to what I have read in detail yesterday, enormous effort has been made. We have seen how to deal with technology. All 2050 predictions have been based on all these. But, well, first of all, we have to change humans. When we talk about genetic engineering, revolution, and all technologies which provide the human future, actually, humans, as we have known for decades ago, humans have to be changed in order to cope themselves, to cope with these forms of technology. Because when today we say that synthetic telepathy, which means that a human person can read the ideas or can read what another person thinking about by 2050. This is how to affect society. This is a big ambitious. Otherwise, we have to train humans to cope with this. Otherwise, we would have sufficed ourselves with the aspiration of 2030. But if we are looking beyond 2030, 2050, or even beyond the 2100, humans should be capable of coping with this vastly changing technology. All the world's conferences have been focusing on this. So we have to face diverse challenges. I'd like to add the Egyptian state. The Egyptian state has been following the strategies 2020, 2030, and 2050. So at this conference we've had to strike a comparison between every vision for every date of these. What we did for 2020, and what we are going to do for 2030, and what we are going to do beyond 2030, 2050. Last October, a vision for the Egyptian, as a vision has been spelled out by the Egyptian state of 2030. The part devoted to Africa. Dr. Magid said that we are sprucing up the image, beautifying the image. This is a real problem. We don't want to spruce the image. If some racism, there has been a racism problem in Egypt, which has to be dealt with. When someone from a different race gets on the bus, say to him, "Don't sit beside me on the bus or on the train." We have to admit, we have to confess, Egypt has been gripped by a real and genuine racism problem which we have to address. We can't deny it. I'm going to start from the part of scientific research, which is a major part. Scientific research is a major part of education, but we have to define the perspective or the approach to scientific research. More field with scientists to be made rather than in addition to the more specific ones. We need to engage to get more people on board with us in doing scientific research, to engage more people in participation. Education cities can be set up by communities within the framework of scientific research. Dr. Heba, values should constitute. You talk in English, so that I'm going to change into English.
So critical, and that's why when we talk of global citizenship is underlining values of inclusion, democracy, human rights, accepting the others. These are critical values that are part of how we should be engaging with the topic of global citizenship. In addition, what's critical is how we train our teachers in faculties of education. In most of the advanced countries, such as Finland, that was mentioned before, the profession of teaching is done through some of the highest programs at university level, faculties of education, where teachers are taught empathy. They're taught caring. They're taught the highest humane values so that they're able to enact these in a classroom. And you're quite right, we also need parenting education, and that's why we're opening learning cities to formal and non-formal, and also with a lot of parenting within that. In terms of Asia, yes, you're quite right. There's a lot of learning that happens on the job, and that's part of the learning city philosophy. There's a lot of formal, non-formal. ILO has done a lot of that in the past, but again, it continues in learning cities where learning happens in families and in the workplace, quite obviously. Yes, Dr. Rafi, yes, 21st century skills are primordial and they need to be part of the overall learning, critical and scientific thinking. And I think Dr. Delauer's interventions were sublime, and I tend to agree totally. I was about to say, yes, there is racism and we need to confront it. And it's part of, and it's obviously been around because we've been such a homogeneous society for the longest time. Now that we're getting more diversified, it's time that diversity becomes a topic of learning in our faculties of education. There's nothing that teaches teachers about diversity. They're taught that in different countries where diversity exists, but because we've been so homogeneous for the longest time, it's time we did that. Humans are going to change, for sure, and you're quite right, because our brains are malleable anyway, and they will continue to change with technology, especially with teenagers. You know, we'll see a lot of brain changes, human bodily changes, etc. But I suspect that there are some aspects that will continue, even with robotics, that will continue to be truly human, and that's the domain of affect. And that's the domain we need to work on more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Malak, for all your valuable answers. And we can speak forever and ever in education, but we have to go to Professor Khalid Abu Zaid, who's a Senior Regional Water Resource Program Manager, Center for Environment and Development of the Arab Region and Europe. Professor Khalid is going to speak about what will a sustainable life in Egypt in 2050 be like.
Can we go downstairs so we can watch it?
Thank you very much, Dr. Hen. Let me, first I'd like to thank UNDP and Biblioteca Alexandrina for the invitation to be part of this very important conference. I would like first to give you a quick overview on the outputs of the dialogues under this topic of sustainable life in 2050. It talked about climate and the economy, effective land use planning in 2050, North Coast Mediterranean economy connector, the coastal areas depending on desalination and with renewable energy, the Suez Canal zone manufacturing and trade facilities, a Nile Corridor, more dependency on Red Sea coast tourism, Western Desert solar energy producer, Nile Delta and Valley agriculture production kept and maintained, and the Nile Delta climate change, sea level rise protection in place. Under climate, population, and innovation, there will be inevitable climate change impacts, but there will also be sustainable lifestyles, artificial intelligence in water, agriculture, and energy. Under climate and adaptation, there will be, hopefully, climate smart and precision agriculture, increased investment in mitigation. Under sustainable life, better health and education for all, and somehow dealing with the generational divide, the older looking at the social and economic development, and the younger looking at the environment and potential for technology. Let me just spice it up a little bit with some figures and facts of what could be a more detailed assessment in the future that could be carried out maybe by another detailed process similar to this one, looking at everything in more details in sustainable development. There will be several scenarios on the distribution of population, which may reach 170, 180 million in 2050. And these scenarios could be, if you look at the red lines are the existing or the population as of 2008, this one, in the different governorates in Egypt. The yellow scenario is looking at people increasing and the population increasing in the same governorates, in the same areas, building on agricultural land, and the same problem is still as is, while a more optimistic scenario is looking at out of valley, and everybody is moving and developing in the deserts, in the desert areas, and protecting the agriculture areas. This will be how this scenario would look like, with these populations in the Nile Valley and in the Delta are increasing, and all these vast areas of desert with low population. But if you look at the next scenario, you're looking at more population here and more population here and more population here and there, and pretty much maintaining the existing population in the Nile Valley and Delta to protect the agriculture land and in the Delta and in the Nile Valley. But in any case, we need to secure water resources for the 2050 water demands. This is just one of the scenarios looking at water demands of about 88. Right now we're using about 82 or something billion cubic meters per year with the recycling of water and the reuse of water. But in 2050 we may be going up to 88 billion cubic meters per year. And this water is not even enough. In 2015, Egypt had imported virtual water in food in the amount of 49 billion cubic meters in that particular year. And it's increasing with the increase in population. So it's almost the same as Egypt's quota from the Nile, which is 55.5 billion cubic meters per year. So in 2050, we need to double this number because the population is going to increase from 80 to 160 or 170, or from 90 to 180 billion people. So you either find the water resources to cultivate this food or find the economic requirements to find the money to import that food. So Egypt will continue to secure its existing Nile water rights and uses. As you might know, Egypt is sharing the Nile with 11 countries. All the rainfall is in the south, Sudan, South Sudan, Ethiopia, and Egypt is depending only on the drainage of these rainfall through the Nile, where there is almost no rainfall in Egypt. And it's using 55.5 billion cubic meters per year of this water, while the Nile Basin countries receive 7,000 billion cubic meters per year, and the Nile Basin within these countries receives 1,660 billion cubic meters per year. In 1997, the picture was like this. These red things represent the dams that were on the Nile system. In 2019, there is these much more dams in place. And there are also proposed ones in yellow. You can see them. What will the Nile dam map look like in 2050? There are some Ethiopian plans for some additional dams on the Blue Nile. This is just a picture of the Blue Nile, but there are also other rivers within the Nile system in Ethiopia. And we can't ignore the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which is being built right now on the Blue Nile, which is the main tributary of water resources for Egypt, for the Nile. And its capacity is about 74 billion cubic meters per year. This is how much had been built right now. And the lake behind this dam is going to increase. This is this summer. This lake was developed behind the dam because of this small parts of the dam being built. But this is going to expand to a possible maximum of about 74 billion cubic meters per year. This 74 billion cubic meters is the same as the shares of Egypt and Sudan together, 18.5 plus 55.5 billion. This is the lake that was created in August of this year, but it's expected to expand to cover all the way to this additional saddle dam and to cover all this area. Of course, this dam is going to be associated with some evaporation losses, some seepage losses, which may reduce a little bit the flows downstream. This here shows the line in green shows the flows of the Blue Nile in the past 100 years. The average may reduce down to this blue line after the dam has been built. What's the impact of this on the High Aswan Dam and the water resources of Egypt? There are some potential GERD, the Ethiopian dam, impacts on the High Aswan Dam hydropower and water availability, which may be felt by 2050. It may not be felt today, but it may be felt in 2050 because of the accumulative effect of the evaporation losses and the seepage losses, where these losses may have been stored in the High Aswan Dam. But because of the GERD or the Ethiopian dam, these losses will be deducted from the flows of the Blue Nile, and therefore the impact may be felt in the future when Egypt needs to extract more water from the reservoir because of the low flows that might come in the future. As you know, that the flows of the Nile follows ups and downs. It may be high in one year and low in the other. Some of the scenarios that we studied looks at the possibility of maybe about 10 meters drop in the average levels of the High Aswan Dam from this green line to this blue line, which results in a reduced hydropower generation from the High Aswan Dam. But the most important is also the impact on the water availability. And this here shows if you simulate these previous 100 years into the future, you will look at water levels in the High Aswan Dam like this compared to this green line. And this is the dead storage, where if this line goes down below this red line here, the water cannot flow from the gates of the High Aswan Dam. And therefore, during these low floods that comes into the High Aswan Dam, Egypt and Sudan may have to reduce their shares for all these years here and maybe later on as well. This is a worst case scenario which will result in probably some reductions in Egypt and Sudan's shares. There may be a better scenario with less years of deficit, less amount of deficit. But what I want to show is that maybe after 40 or maybe after 30 or 40 years, this may be felt when the low flows of the Nile are here. That's why it's very important for the three countries to decide and agree on the rules of operation, because the lower they operate the dam in Ethiopia, the less the losses and the less the impacts. So the agreement on the rules of operation is very important. Anyway, in 2050, desalination will be there for the coastal cities, and also the reuse of all wastewater is anticipated. If we look at wastewater, I personally consider it the renewable and increasing water resource for the future, because as population increase, you need to provide them with municipal water. 80% of the municipal water goes back to wastewater. So you have a resource that is increasing with time, increasing with the increase of population. So we need to depend on this as well and make use of every drop of this water. It is anticipated that in 2050, Egypt will have about 17 billion cubic meters per year of wastewater. If this is treated, it could be a potential resource, and currently some of this water is being recycled and reused as well. Also harnessing the additional untapped Nile waters. If you look at this here, and we have our friends from South Sudan. This is South Sudan. This is where the source of future additional water resources for the Nile is. There are projects that can make available 18 billion cubic meters per year for South Sudan, and Egypt. And it is very important to also maybe hope that by 2050 we will have some of these projects implemented. Talks have been there. I've personally had the privilege of meeting with President Salva Kiir and Vice President Machar. Hopefully there will be stability and peace between the two and in South Sudan to allow for joint development of transboundary Nile waters. The drainage of some of the swamps there and making use of these lands for agriculture and also increasing the yield of the Nile is very important. We have Mr. Dictus here with us. The Netherlands revolution in agriculture depended on drainage of water. And therefore, such kind of projects such as the Jonglei Canal, for instance, which 70% of which have been completed, and you have only 30% that's missing. And it is this is the 30% in red, where the drainage of this water can actually increase the yield of the Nile. This is when instability in the South Sudan has caused this project to stop. This was the big driller there, which drilled some of the canal, or the 70% of this canal back then. Now, if we hope and think of this project to be, and others in South Sudan or in the Upper Nile to be completed, we need another channel for this water to flow. This is a possibility of where this channel, because the current channel of the Nile cannot accommodate more water because of the buildings around it and all that, so you need another channel. That's this is where it could be. This could be where this channel is, and it could drain into this depression, Qatar depression, where it can also recharge the groundwater. Protection of the existing agricultural land and the development in the desert lands. We need to stop this encroachment on agricultural land. So hopefully Egypt would have managed to stop urban encroachment on agricultural land and maintained the old Delta and Nile Valley agricultural lands at these current 2020 levels. As you can see, it looks very bad looking at some of these urban encroachments within the delta. We need to maintain it as such and develop into the desert lands with leapfrog expansion in these desert fronts. Rational management of non-renewable groundwater in the desert. The Nubian sandstone aquifer, which is shared with Libya, Sudan, and Chad, is one example. These petrified trees shows that this water there is old, and we need to look at the strategic planning of the utilization of this non-renewable groundwater in the desert. It is sustaining tourism, agriculture, and ecosystems. Climate change and water and adaptation to sea level rise will pumping this non-renewable groundwater, which may be by 2050 up to 120 billion cubic meters that have been used. This is about 20,000 years old water. Would that entrapped groundwater, when it's pumped into the atmosphere, will bring into the global hydrological cycle what may reverse IPCC's predicted decreases in precipitation in the region? We have to study these kind of ideas. Climate change, of course, the current situation is as such, but with the inundated areas with water in the delta. But if a 1 meter sea level rise, the picture will be like this. If 2 meter rise in sea level, the picture would be like this. This is very simple simulation, but there are current projects under UNDP and others, Ministry of Water Resources and Irrigation, to protect against sea level rise. Hopefully, by then, these areas will be well protected. Water and energy. We heard it also from Dr. Dictus this morning. The floating solar panels on Lake Nasser, that may be an idea, where we can save water from evaporation, but also generate energy. And then the Nile Corridor, and one of these projects the Nile Corridor is not just in Egypt, but we could also think of a Nile Corridor with the Nile countries, and there is actually a project that is being studied now, which is called the VicMed, to bring a navigational channel from the Lake Victoria to the Mediterranean through the Nile, and this will bring the countries together and enhance the trade and joint development between the countries. So we hope that integrated sustainable development planning will be achieved, because it is important to achieve the prosperous 2050 Egypt, so that we don't end up in the end with mismatching plans or mismatching tracks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the very scientific and clear presentation, but a little bit pessimistic, and at the same time you're giving good opportunities for the future. But we should be very careful in using water, because there is great misuse of water in our country. We really are suffering from water scarcity. اتفضل حضرتك. You're going to...
Saeed Abdel Galil. I was the chairperson of a center in the desert. I was also a national representative to the United Nations in the agreement of the desertification, fighting desertification. I basically want to comment on two things. One is the rate of desertification in Egypt is quite high. We are losing a lot. I think the last number was, some time ago, and this is probably like a national security secret. We're probably like 3.5 fedans every hour. 3.5 fedan we lost. And you talked about our loans, the loans that we get from outside, and I think one of the research that you were involved in is that when you, in fact, turn into urban areas, they probably use more water than we used for agriculture. Now, in any case, we are hard. People don't know where exactly we are. We are the desert. 86% of the total area of Egypt is very dry. We are ahead of everybody else, all regions like before Libya, Saudi, all of these, that are suffering from dryness. So, therefore, I liked what Dr. Malak said. When we talk about decentralization or learning, if it does not happen, then that will probably depend on the ecosystem of everything. Probably the coastal areas are different from Siwa, different from Alexandria, different from Cairo, different from Upper Egypt. So this is in preparation of, that is, you need to be thinking of overseas productions. You have the Sudan, you have some African countries, and you see, Egypt must take agriculture outside. And I don't want to give examples of neighboring countries, and many people, sometimes people have like 1.8 billion pounds, and they export to other countries. And we need to consider that carefully. So you don't have resources, but I want to highlight now this link between education and learning, and I wanted to deal between learning and education, because there is a difference between learning and education. Learning is more interactive. Education is only one way. It comes from teacher or speaker to listener or to student. So that's why I'm saying that the figures that we handled here and there, as we as representatives of working for that UN, for that agreement, again fighting against desertification, I think even the area that is available, currently available, which is something like the productivity has been decreased than it should be. So the thing is, it's a case of water. It's an issue of water. There is shortage, but there are other things that need to be dealt with, and we need to be able to get out of this of Egypt, meaning that we need to extend an outreach and see what possibilities are there for us to create, to make any improvement. That's it. I wanted to focus on that. Any more questions there from the floor? Okay, right. Now, I think Dr. Khalid will probably take us more on the way of where are we going here. So, I think these scenarios that are, although pessimistic, but maybe we probably need to stop and think what exactly we're doing and what can we do. People now are living in a different lifestyle. Now, what about decisions being taken now? Are we on the right track? And if we're on the right track, is this enough? And I think this also, all of this adds to the problems in education. We need to adapt. I know that. But How far can we go? Now, of course, we get different percentages and rates, but we have some frameworks that we're working on. People are going to face some challenges as far as energy, land, water, and of course, in addition to the problems in education. If we're looking at the resources of Egypt now that are available, will this be enough for the current generations to survive? So, thank you. More questions? Okay, yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so we've got your message. Dr. Darwish, you are, you have some concern with education, but after we finish the questions, yeah, I think you now have a comment.
Thank you very much. I would like to reconfirm what Dr. Khalid was saying regarding the critical situation of Egypt in terms of water shortage or water crisis, and specifically talking about what is going on with the Grand Renaissance Dam in Ethiopia. And I would like to clarify some of the misinterpretations which have been going on either in the media or within the people and stuff like that. And the first one is that people are made to believe, or actually the media is trying to portray the situation as if we are only caring about filling, because the filling stage or stages is the period at which we will be suffering. Actually, there are a set of impacts related to the filling stage and another set of impacts related to the long-term operation of the new dam. And the impacts on Egypt during long-term operation are much, much, much more than the impacts during filling. So this is the first fact. The second fact is, it has been said in the media that we are talking about filling in 2 years or 3 years, or it would be good to fill in 7 years, while the actual situation is totally different. We are talking with the other two countries about stages. Filling should be done in stages. So stage number 1 accommodates this much of volume of water to be stored. Stage number 2, another volume of water. Stage number 3, another volume of water, and so on. Now these stages could be done in 1 year. If God sends good rain and we have a wet year, then we can accelerate the filling. But if God does not send enough rain, then we have to decelerate the filling. And that's why we insist on talking about stages rather than talking about years. So filling in 5 years in some conditions might be very good and beneficial, while filling in 8 years in other conditions will be really detrimental. So let us refrain from using these kind of stages and stuff like that. And the third point is that in order to accumulate a new dam in our system, and these are direct inputs to what we will be suffering, or the things that we have to take care in 2050. One of them is that if we don't operate both dams together, like cooperation or multi-reservoir operation or dual reservoir operation, then we will be losing. So we have to insist on having these two dams working together. And then the last point related to can we put like what we call risk allocation between different countries within the Nile Basin? What's the risk of losing 1 billion cubic meters per year for Egypt, and what's the risk of losing the same amount for Ethiopia or for Sudan? And in order to do that, we have to look at why are we using water? We are using water in Ethiopia to generate electricity. So as a matter of fact, 1 billion cubic meters will result in maybe losing this much of gigawatts in Ethiopia. But 1 billion cubic meters lost in Egypt means that we are losing this much of lives in Egypt, because water is life-sustaining in Egypt. It's a matter of life or death. While the situation in Ethiopia is different, it's a matter of generating electricity and getting more money or dollars or not. So these are all factors that has to be taken care about.
Thank you. دكتور هشام
تفضل دكتور هشام.
ده آخر سؤال في السيشن دي.
هذا هو آخر سؤال. This is the last question for today's session. But I think more of these are comments. So, Dr. Khalid, you may pick and choose from all that has been said so that you can provide your response.
Thanks, Dr. Khaled, for your interesting presentation. Hisham Al-Askari, Professor of Earth System Science and Remote Sensing at Chapman University, California. And I will have the honor to talk after lunch, inshallah. Just to follow up on what Dr. Khaled said and the comment that was just made about the water scarcity and the issues that we're going to be facing in the future. Dr. Khaled showed a map of precipitation which is happening in the southern parts of the Nile Basin. A lot of our projections or a lot of our predictions right now are showing that by 2025, if not even like a little bit down the road, even that part of the world is going to be suffering massive droughts. So my information for our fellow colleague who just talked about like the filling periods, I think it will be much more important to tie the amount of the filling with the hydrological cycles, because from what we are seeing right now from the data and from analyzing this data using satellite observations and a lot of different kinds of climate models, it is showing that this part of the world is going to be suffering massive droughts. So actually Ethiopia is going to be having droughts like, starting 2021, 2022, and that's going to be shown in the data. So tying the filling of the GERD with different kind of stages is okay to talk about, but when it comes to the actual word, you need to take into account the hydrological cycles, because there will be like a lot of droughts happening, and we will show that from our data. Thank you.
دكتور خالد اتفضل. في سؤال تاني؟ طيب. اتفضل. The last question. في النص.
Thank you for the opportunity. So I would like to comment on educational arena. You talk about the life of Egypt, how it will look like in the next 30 years. Because I'm a student and also I'm one who is concerned about African future in the next 30 years, I would like to comment on things that related to our educational system. In Africa, we all admit that we don't have any good educational system. There is no quality. When we came to Egypt, we thought that maybe there would be a different thing, but we got the same thing, that there in our country, there in Kenya, and also there in Uganda. So us African, or us Egyptian in particular, what is the mechanism are you going to use in the next 30 years to make sure that our educational system has retained its normal values or have a good quality that can inspire other students, especially African students, to come to Egypt and get a good educational system? Thank you. My name is Gatieg, I'm South Sudanese.
Thank you. We'll come back to you. نخلص الأسئلة. Is there a question back there? One of you. You choose one. Huh? يلا. ما يحسوش بس إن إحنا سايبين. There is a problem in the educational system in the whole of Africa, and we must change. This is definite. But you should get the best of it while you are here in Egypt, because if you want to try, you will achieve. That's why we want
to all of us.
Yes.
I just want to thank the professor, colleague, for nice presentation. It was nice. My question is, but before I ask question, I wanted to supplement about the use of water in Egypt. Because use of water will also affect Egypt if they don't take care of how they use water. And also about matter of life, as one of the professors said before, because the one in Ethiopia is about generating electricity, but the one for Egypt is about life, because if they don't agree well, that means by 2050, Egypt will be in a difficult situation. And we are also African. We care for each other too. And so coming to about Jonglei Canal, because I happen to be from Jonglei, and I'm just next to the Nile, Jonglei Canal. So you studied it, and what could be the effect of Jonglei Canal if you happen to use or to, because you said before that 70% has been completed, but 30% is still because of war. So what will be the effect of this Jonglei Canal when it's complete to the local people in Jonglei, basically because we are cattle keepers? And what will really affect us if this canal happen to be used and collect all the water in swamps to be reserved in a canal? And that water will be directed to Egypt. And because it will increase the flow back to Lake Nasser and the Nile will be okay, and then Egypt will use more water to sustain the life. So my question is, how and what is the effect of that Jonglei Canal to local people in South Sudan, especially in Jonglei, especially because they are cattle keepers? So I'm a medical student in Alexandria University, third year. Thank you so much.
Thank you. تفضل.
Thank you very much for all these comments, and well, they're mostly all comments. So I totally agree with all of them. Dr. Ismail, you're quite right in everything that you mentioned, the desertification and of course the issues related to learning and education and the productivity of the agricultural land. Those are all very valid comments. Also, the decision, this is a very important issue that was raised here also regarding the decisions that we are making today, and also involving the people. I mean, in 2050, I'll be 85 years old. But the youth of today are really the people who will be affected by these decisions. And I think that we should be including them in the studies and in the decisions that are made today. We also need to think of the institutions that will be there, are the government institutions, the educational systems, all that, the type of topics and subjects that are taught. All these need to be, of course, looked at thoroughly. Dr. Ahmed, of course, he emphasized everything and very important things, and he is in close relation with the people that are doing the negotiations. So I agree with all what he said, of course. Dr. Hisham also talked about the droughts that will be coming maybe in the next couple of years, but we are also talking about cycles. So there will be also maybe floods or extreme events coming at other times, but studying these cycles and the frequency of these cycles, and I think your presentation this afternoon will be very important to shed lights on this. And finally, the educational system in Africa, I think Egypt is doing a lot also in addressing the issue of education at the African continent as well. And of course, this is an important issue that we need to raise the level of education and learning at the whole continent, not just one country or one region or the other. And then finally, the issue of Jonglei, and before Jonglei, the use of water. Let me, I don't know if it was clear in my presentation or not, but Egypt has one of the most effective and efficient overall efficiency in the use of water all over the world, because Egypt is recycling and reusing its water more than once. Egypt is recycling about 20 billion cubic meters of water, and this is in agriculture drainage that is being reused, treated wastewater that is being reused. Even groundwater that is recharged from irrigation is being pumped and reused again. So it has one of the highest overall water use efficiency. And then the Jonglei Canal and how it will maybe benefit also the people, the local people in South Sudan, because as I mentioned, in the Netherlands, for instance, one of the most effective agriculture systems in the world is actually based on drainage. So drainage of some of the swamps, the swamps in Sudan, they receive about 400 or 600 billion cubic meters of rain per year. So if you talk about 18, even the Jonglei Canal is just 4 billion, or in its second phase it will be about 9 billion or so. So if you're talking about 9 billion out of 600 billion, that's nothing. It will even probably make available some swamp areas that will be made available for agriculture. And some of the water that will be diverted to the canal and to the Nile system, part of it will also could be used in South Sudan for irrigation or for drinking purposes or others. This water will be shared between the countries that share that part, South Sudan, Sudan, and Egypt. So I'm sure that there will be joint benefits, but the three countries have to sit together and study these kind of projects, because it's about time to look at that. Thank you very much.
It's clear that Africa has to be united, and we want you to be really included in our society, and we would like to be included in your society. Before finishing, one comment from Dr. Ahmed Darwish, and that's all.
Thank you for giving me the floor. Telegrams. Between 2011 and 2015, I was out of public office and I was interested in three things: education, values, and future. The only success we gained was for the future, because it was an NGO that I was honored to be shared in establishing it, called Turus, that first invited Dr. Ashraf Al-Arabi and suggested that Egypt must have a document for 2030. And the rest is history. But when it comes to education, I'll give you numbers that are 2015, a little bit old, before I joined the Suez Canal Economic Zone. Those who were born was more than those who joined first grade school by 550,000. Which means that in 6 years, there will be 550,000 more kids knocking our door saying we'd like to go to first grade. If you translate that to building schools in a classic way, and let's say the ratio of students to pupils to teachers is 1 to 45. 1 to 45 is very high. Let's say 1 to 45, which means a 2-classroom school would take 90 kids. That translates that we really need to build 6,000 schools in 6 years, which is 1,000 schools per year, which is 3 schools every day. We did not build 3 schools every day in the past 3 years. I don't think even if we have the land and we have the money, I don't think we have the land, we have enough contractors to build that. So the education problem in Egypt has to be approached in a totally different way, not the classic way, because the classic way of building schools and trying to find availability will not work. In 2015, we had 1.1 billion teachers. I bet now we are approaching 1.2 billion teachers. How we are going to train them, how we are going, if they are not really under good living conditions, how they would translate this emotions into the kids that they have in school. The value system in Egypt is deteriorating, and you can draw a clear line starting 1960. Countries that had an economic shake, like Germany and Japan after World War II, usually they grow up running in 8 years. Portugal, the revolution was in 73, in 81, Portugal was doing very well. So it's normally 8 years if you have an economic shake. But those who get a social shake, they don't wake up. In 1960, we had what we call the July social laws. And that's changed the way the society is thinking a lot. And then in less than 18 years, in 78, you got someone coming saying, oh, but by the way, socialism was very bad. And you got the pendulum to go all the way to the other side. So we have, Maha talked about harassment. I have a case that happened in Doki a few years ago, where, you know, a girl that's wearing very decent, someone approached her from the back and touched her in a very sensitive location. And to my surprise and my son's surprise, there were actually 3 guards, Bawabin, sitting at the other side of the street, and they didn't raise an eyebrows. I mean, when I was a kid, you know, this guy would have been actually cold, spanked, you know, his hair shaved. Something happened. It was, you know, my son and myself thought a little bit, why should we start catching him? And we did actually and reported him, but we were afraid that he would raise a knife or something on us. So it was the society that was deterring harassment. Now, I mean, the whole value system is changing. Dr. Maged Osman talked a lot about the value in the working environment because of socialism and so on. So education and values are a problem. I'm sorry that you insisted on a contribution. My contribution is not a solution. My contribution is to say someone who would come up with a solution for the educational system in Egypt is the someone who will deserve that we recognize them in Tahrir Square in Cairo. Tahrir Square is the only square in Cairo that was never actually had someone in the middle of it for a very never ever. So maybe that would be the guy who deserves that statue in Tahrir Square. Thank you. Sorry for long.
Shukran, Dr. I'd like to thank very much the panelists, Dr. Maged Osman, Dr. Malak Zalouk, Dr. Khalid, and Dr. Khalid Abu Zaid. And it was a real pleasure and very informative contribution from the 3 and from the audience. So thank you all very much.
Okay.
And sorry for the delay. The time ran out.
Thank you, Dr. Hind.